When Lisa first started working for us, it felt like a natural fit. She had been a close family friend for years, practically an honorary aunt to our two kids, and Emma insisted we help her out when she hit a rough patch. Lisa had lost her job as an administrative assistant after the company downsized, and her confidence was shaken. "She's always been there for us, Mark," Emma had said, her tone insistent. "The least we can do is give her some work until she gets back on her feet." It was hard to argue with Emma when she used that tone. So, I agreed, even though hiring a cleaner wasn't something we'd ever needed before. Lisa came twice a week, and I had to admit, she was good at her job. The house sparkled after each visit, and her cheerful demeanor seemed to brighten everyone's mood. At first, everything felt normal, better than normal, even. Lisa quickly settled into her role, and her presence became part of our routine. She was warm, funny, and genuinely kind, with a knack for making everyone feel comfortable. Emma seemed happier, too, and I was glad we could support our friend. But after a few months, I started noticing small changes. Nothing dramatic, just little things that didn't quite add up. Emma began spending more time at home when Lisa was there, rearranging her schedule to help out around the house. They laughed together in the kitchen, their voices low and conspiratorial, as though sharing secrets I wasn't privy to. When I walked in on one of their conversations, they'd fall silent, their smiles a little too quick to return. I brushed it off at first, telling myself I was being paranoid. They were close friends. Of course, they'd be comfortable around each other. But the feeling nagged at me, growing stronger with each passing week. I couldn't shake the sense that something was shifting in our home, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I decided to bring it up. "You and Lisa have been spending a lot of time together lately," I said casually, pulling back the covers. Emma glanced at me, her expression neutral. "She's here a lot, Mark. It's hard not to." "Yeah, but," I hesitated, not wanting to come across as accusatory. "You seem closer than usual. Is everything okay?" Emma's brow furrowed, and she gave me a small, puzzled smile. "Of course. Lisa's been going through a tough time, and I'm trying to be there for her." "Why?" "Just curious," I said quickly, dropping the subject. The next time Lisa came over, I made a point of staying home. It was a weekday, and I'd told Emma I'd be working remotely. She didn't seem to think anything of it, but Lisa's reaction was interesting. When she arrived, her usual sunny demeanor seemed a little forced. She smiled brightly, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Nervousness, maybe? I couldn't be sure. I stayed in my office for most of the day, but I kept the door open, listening to the sounds of their conversation drifting through the house. They were in the kitchen, laughing about something I couldn't quite hear. Lisa said something that made Emma laugh harder, the sound warm and unguarded. For a moment, I felt a pang of jealousy, followed quickly by guilt. What was I jealous of? Their friendship? Later that afternoon, I walked into the living room and found Lisa sitting on the couch, her hand resting lightly on Emma's shoulder as they looked at something on her phone. They looked up when I entered, their smiles almost identical. "Hey, Mark," Lisa said, her tone cheerful. "Taking a break from work?" "Something like that," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "What are you two up to?" Emma held up her phone. Lisa was showing me photos of her niece's wedding. She looked stunning. "Sounds nice," I said, though my eyes lingered on Lisa's hand, still resting on Emma's shoulder. She noticed me looking and pulled it away quickly, her smile faltering for just a moment. That night, as I lay in bed, the nagging feeling returned. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the little moments I'd observed, the laughter, the touches, the way they seemed to close ranks when I was around, it was starting to feel like more than just friendship. But how could I bring it up without sounding paranoid? Lisa was a trusted family friend, and Emma had never given me any reason to doubt her loyalty. Still, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. I resolved to keep an eye on things, to pay closer attention without letting on that I was suspicious. If there was something going on, I needed proof, something undeniable. And if I was wrong, well, I'd owe them both an apology. The next few weeks were a blur of half-truths and quiet tension. I started noticing more of those little moments. Whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room, shared glances that lingered too long, and the way Emma always seemed to light up when Lisa was around. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, but the evidence was mounting. One evening, Emma told me she was going to bed early, complaining of a headache. I stayed up, flipping through channels on the TV, but not really watching. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night and headed upstairs. As I passed the guest bathroom, I noticed the light was on, the faint sound of voices drifting through the door. I paused, my heart pounding as I leaned closer. Emma's voice was low and soft. "Are you sure this is okay?" Lisa's reply was too quiet to hear, but her tone was soothing, almost intimate. My blood ran cold as the pieces clicked into place. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to burst in, to demand an explanation. But another part, the part that was terrified of what I might find, held me back. If this was what I thought it was, I needed to be sure. I went back downstairs, my heart heavy with suspicion and dread. The cracks in my marriage were becoming impossible to ignore, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend not to see them. The days that followed were a strange mix of paranoia and vigilance. Every glance, every touch, every shared laugh between Emma and Lisa now felt loaded with subtext. I told myself I was being ridiculous, letting my imagination run wild, but the feeling in my gut refused to be silenced. I started paying closer attention to Emma's behavior. She'd always been a creature of habit: early morning coffee, her favorite podcast on the drive to work, and evenings spent unwinding with a book or her shows. But now, little things were changing. She seemed distracted, her phone constantly in her hand. When I asked her about it, she brushed me off with a vague, "Work stuff?" Lisa's visits felt different too. She still came twice a week, but her usual sunny demeanor was muted. She avoided eye contact with me, her smiles quick and nervous. Once, I caught her watching Emma with an expression I couldn't quite place, soft, almost longing. When she noticed me looking, she turned away quickly, her face flushed. One afternoon, I decided to work from home again. Lisa arrived as usual, her cheerful "good morning" sounding more forced than usual. Emma had taken the day off, claiming she needed to catch up on some errands. The two of them disappeared into the kitchen, their voices low and conspiratorial. I stayed in my office, pretending to focus on my laptop while listening intently. Their laughter drifted down the hallway, interspersed with moments of hushed silence. My curiosity grew stronger with each passing minute. What were they talking about? And why did it feel like I was the odd one out in my own home? Around noon, I decided to take a break. As I walked into the kitchen, the conversation stopped abruptly. Emma was leaning against the counter, her arms crossed, while Lisa stood across from her, holding a coffee mug. They both turned toward me, their expressions carefully neutral. "Hey, Mark," Emma said, her smile a little too bright. "Need a break from work?" "Just grabbing some water," I said casually, glancing between them. "What's going on?" "Nothing much," Lisa said quickly, her voice higher than usual. "Just catching up." I nodded, though the tension in the room was palpable. As I filled my glass, I noticed something on the counter, a folded piece of paper, partially obscured by Lisa's mug. It was faintly wrinkled, as though it had been handled frequently. "What's that?" I asked, gesturing toward the paper. Lisa moved quickly, grabbing the mug and the paper in one fluid motion. "Oh, just my grocery list," she said with a nervous laugh. "I always forget something if I don't write it down." Emma chuckled, but it sounded strained. "You and your lists," she said, shaking her head. The exchange was quick, almost seamless, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. They were hiding something, I was sure of it. That evening, as Emma was getting ready for bed, I decided to take another look around the house. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. I started with the kitchen, checking the trash and recycling bins for the paper Lisa had been so quick to grab. It wasn't there. Next, I moved to Emma's office. It was tidy as always, her desk clutter-free except for a few notebooks and her laptop. I opened one of the notebooks, flipping through the pages. Most of it was mundane. Work notes, to-do lists. But near the back, I found something that made my heart stop. It was a short note, written in Emma's neat handwriting. "We need to be more careful. He's starting to notice." My chest tightened as I stared at the words. There was no signature, no context, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears. Emma knew I was suspicious, and she was actively hiding something. The next morning, I decided to confront her. As we sat at the breakfast table, I slid the notebook across to her. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Emma's eyes widened as she read the note. For a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. But then she forced a laugh, shaking her head. "Mark, this is nothing," she said, handing the notebook back. "It's just a reminder to myself. You've been acting weird lately, and I didn't want to make things worse." "You wrote this because of me?" I asked, skeptical. "Yes," she said quickly. "You've been so on edge, and I didn't want to upset you. I thought you might have been stressed about work or something." Her explanation was smooth, almost rehearsed. But her hands were trembling, and she refused to meet my eyes. Lisa arrived later that day, her usual smile faltering when she saw me. "Morning, Mark," she said, her tone cautious. "Lisa," I said, nodding. "Busy day?" "Just the usual," she replied, quickly disappearing into the laundry room. I followed her, leaning against the doorframe as she sorted through a pile of towels. "Lisa," I said, keeping my tone light, "can I ask you something?" "Sure," she said without looking up. "You and Emma have been spending a lot of time together lately," I said. "Is there something I should know?" Her hands froze, the towel slipping from her grasp. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight. "I mean," I said slowly, "you seem close. Closer than usual." Lisa straightened, turning to face me. Her cheeks were flushed, and her smile was strained. "We're friends, Mark," she said. "That's all." Her words were convincing, but her body language wasn't. She avoided my gaze, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her shirt. It was the same nervous energy I'd seen in Emma, the same tension that hinted at a secret neither of them wanted me to uncover. That night, as I lay in bed, the pieces started to come together. The whispered conversations, the nervous glances, the way they always seemed to close ranks when I was around. It wasn't just my imagination. They were hiding something, and I was going to find out what. The tension in the house was becoming unbearable. Every glance, every word exchanged between Emma and Lisa felt heavy with unspoken meaning. The easy laughter and warmth they once shared had shifted into something more guarded, more secretive. I was no longer a part of their world, and that realization gnawed at me. It wasn't just the emotional distance. It was the small, tangible changes that fueled my growing suspicion. Emma had started dressing differently, favoring more fitted, casual outfits on the days Lisa came over. Lisa, too, seemed to linger longer after her work was done, finding excuses to stay for coffee or to help Emma with small projects. It felt like they were testing boundaries, inching closer to a line they thought I couldn't see. One afternoon, I came home early from work, unannounced. The house was quiet, too quiet. Lisa's car was parked in the driveway, but the usual sound of vacuuming or tidying was absent. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside, the air heavy with an unfamiliar tension. "Emma?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. No answer. I set my bag down and moved through the house, checking each room. The kitchen was spotless, the laundry neatly folded on the couch. Everything looked normal, perfect, even. But then I heard it, a muffled laugh coming from upstairs. My stomach tightened as I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The laughter grew clearer, accompanied by hushed voices. It was coming from our bedroom. I stopped outside the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Their voices were low, intimate, punctuated by bursts of laughter that felt too personal to be innocent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling with a mix of anger and dread. Pushing the door open, I froze. Emma and Lisa were sitting on the bed, their heads close together, laughing at something on Emma's phone. They looked up in unison, their smiles faltering when they saw me. "Mark," Emma said quickly, standing up, "you're home early." I glanced between them, my gaze lingering on the way Lisa's hand rested lightly on Emma's knee. She pulled it away quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I was just showing Emma some photos from my trip," Lisa said, her voice overly cheerful. "Right?" I said, my voice flat. "And that's worth sitting on our bed for?" Emma's brow furrowed, and she crossed her arms defensively. "You're overreacting," she said. "We were just talking." "Talking," I repeated, my eyes narrowing. Funny how that always seems to happen behind closed doors. Lisa stood abruptly, smoothing her shirt. "I should go," she said, her tone uneasy. "I'll see you both later." She brushed past me, her steps quick and deliberate. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house, leaving Emma and me alone in the bedroom. "Mark, what's going on with you?" Emma asked, her voice sharp. "Why are you acting like this?" "Like what?" I shot back. "Like someone who's tired of being lied to?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely taken aback. But then her expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous," she said. "Lisa's my friend. That's all." "Is she?" I asked, my voice rising. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like there's more going on. Emma's jaw tightened, and she turned away, her arms wrapped around herself. "You don't trust me," she said softly. "Do you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. I wanted to say yes, to reassure her, but the truth was undeniable. I didn't trust her, not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of Lisa's hand on Emma's knee, the way they'd laughed together, the way they'd fallen silent when I walked in, it replayed in my mind like a broken record. I kept telling myself it wasn't definitive proof, but the weight of it was crushing. The next morning, I decided to confront Lisa. I waited until Emma left for work, then called Lisa and asked her to stop by. She sounded hesitant but agreed. When she arrived, she looked nervous, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced with something guarded. "What's going on, Mark?" she asked, stepping into the living room. I motioned for her to sit, my heart pounding in my chest. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice steady. "And I want the truth." She hesitated, glancing toward the door as though considering an escape. "Okay," she said finally. "What is it?" I leaned forward, my gaze fixed on hers. "Are you having an affair with Emma?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then she laughed, a short, nervous sound that didn't reach her eyes. "That's ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "Emma's my friend. You know that." "Don't lie to me, Lisa," I said firmly. "I've seen the way you two act around each other. The whispers, the looks, the touches. It's not just friendship. So tell me the truth." Her smile faltered, and she looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "Mark, it's not what you think," she said softly. "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been sneaking around with my wife." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Emma and we've gotten close," she admitted. "But it's not like that. We care about each other." "Care about each other?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's the best you can do?" She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "But Emma's been struggling, and I was just trying to be there for her." "Be there for her?" I said bitterly. "By sitting on our bed and whispering behind my back?" She didn't answer, and the silence that followed was deafening. The betrayal hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. As Lisa left, I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. The truth was still out of reach, but the cracks in their stories were widening. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And when it did, I wasn't sure if I'd be ready for it. I couldn't let it go anymore. The tension in the house was suffocating, and my mind wouldn't stop racing with questions. Lisa's vague answers and Emma's defensive behavior were pushing me toward a breaking point. If I didn't get to the bottom of it soon, I felt like I would explode. The next time Lisa came over, I made a point of staying home again. Emma didn't question it. If anything, she seemed tense, as though bracing for something. Lisa arrived late that morning, her demeanor subdued, her usual cheerfulness replaced with a kind of cautious unease. "Hey, Mark," she said, her smile faltering as she stepped inside. "Lisa," I replied, my tone neutral. Emma hovered in the background, her eyes darting between us. "Coffee, anyone?" she asked, her voice overly bright. "Sure," Lisa said quickly, disappearing into the kitchen with Emma. I lingered in the living room, listening as they spoke in hushed tones. Their voices were too low to make out, but the tone was unmistakable, intense, almost urgent. I felt a pang of anger and frustration. What were they hiding from me? An hour later, Lisa was still there. She and Emma were in the backyard, sitting close together on the patio furniture. From where I stood inside, I could see them through the window, their heads bent in quiet conversation. Lisa's hand rested on Emma's arm, and they laughed softly at something I couldn't hear. I'd had enough. I stepped outside, pretending to check the garden. They looked up as I approached, their expressions shifting quickly. Lisa's to guardedness, Emma's to forced cheerfulness. "Mark," Emma said, her voice a little too bright. "Come join us." "I was just checking the plants," I said, my eyes fixed on them. "Looks like you two are deep in conversation." Lisa glanced at Emma, then back at me. "Just catching up," she said quickly. I nodded, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably long. Lisa fidgeted with her phone, and Emma shifted in her seat, avoiding my gaze. The tension was palpable. That evening, after Lisa left, I confronted Emma again. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Emma," I said, blocking her path as she tried to walk past me. "We need to talk." She sighed, exasperated. "Mark, I'm tired. Can't this wait until tomorrow?" "No," I said firmly. "It can't. I want to know what's going on between you and Lisa." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. But she quickly composed herself, crossing her arms. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone defensive. "You know exactly what I mean," I said, my voice rising. "The whispers, the touches, the way you two act when I'm around. It's not just friendship, Emma. So tell me the truth." She hesitated, her lips trembling as though she were searching for the right words. "Mark," she said softly, her voice breaking. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded, my anger boiling over. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been sneaking around with Lisa behind my back." Tears welled in her eyes, and she looked away. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My chest tightened as the weight of her words sank in. "So it's true," I said, my voice trembling. "You've been having an affair with her." She shook her head quickly. "It's not an affair," she said. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've been lying to me for months, and now you want to call it complicated?" Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. Over the next few days, the house felt like a battlefield. Emma avoided me whenever she could, and I was too angry to try to bridge the gap. Lisa didn't come over, and I suspected Emma had told her to stay away until things calmed down. But I wasn't interested in calming down. I wanted answers. One evening, when Emma was out running errands, I decided to look through her things. I hated myself for doing it, but I needed proof, something concrete to make sense of the mess we were in. Her laptop was unlocked on the kitchen counter, and I hesitated only briefly before opening it. What I found shattered whatever illusions I had left. There were messages between Emma and Lisa, long threads of text that painted a picture of a relationship far deeper than friendship. They talked about their feelings, about how hard it was to keep their connection a secret, about the guilt Emma felt for lying to me. But there was no mention of stopping, no indication that either of them regretted what they were doing. One message, in particular, stood out. I wish we didn't have to hide this. It feels so real, so right, but I hate lying to him. My hands trembled as I read the words, my vision blurring with anger and betrayal. Emma hadn't just cheated on me. She'd built an entirely separate life, one she shared with someone I thought we could trust. When Emma came home, I was waiting for her. The laptop sat open on the table, the messages displayed on the screen. She froze when she saw it, her face draining of color. "Mark," she said, her voice shaking. "I can explain." "Don't bother," I said coldly. "I've seen enough." She sank into a chair, her hands covering her face as she began to cry. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly drowned out by anger. "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you been lying to me?" She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "A few months," she said. "It started after Lisa began working here. And you didn't think to tell me?" I said, my voice rising. "You didn't think I deserved to know that my wife and my friend were sneaking around behind my back?" "I was scared," she said. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Hurt me?" I laughed bitterly. "You didn't want to hurt me? Emma, you've destroyed everything." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, Emma didn't try to defend herself. She just sat there, broken and defeated, as the weight of her betrayal settled over both of us. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same. The drive was a blur. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get out of the house, away from the betrayal, away from them. My mind replayed the scene in our bedroom over and over, each detail cutting deeper than the last. Emma's pleading eyes, Lisa's defiant calm. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a nearby park, the quiet solitude a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside me. For the first time in hours, I let myself feel everything. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I fought back tears, the weight of what I'd seen crashing over me in waves. How had it come to this? Emma and I had built a life together, a home, a marriage I thought was solid. And Lisa, someone I trusted, someone who had been part of our family, had been right there, tearing it apart. By the time I returned home, the house was dark. Lisa's car was gone, and Emma's silhouette was visible through the living room window. She was sitting on the couch, her head in her hands. For a moment, I considered driving away again, but I knew I couldn't avoid this forever. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me. Emma looked up, her face pale and streaked with tears. She stood as I entered, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," I said sharply, holding up a hand. "Don't apologize. Don't try to explain. Just tell me the truth." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the floor. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said softly. "Lisa and I, we didn't mean for it to get this far." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "Didn't mean for it to get this far?" I repeated. "That's the best you can do? Emma, you were kissing her in our bedroom." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know how it looks, but it wasn't planned. It just happened." Her words felt like a slap. "You don't accidentally kiss someone, Emma," I said, my voice rising. "You don't accidentally betray your husband with someone he trusted. So don't stand there and tell me it just happened." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. "But Lisa, she was there for me in a way I didn't expect. And I—" "You what?" I interrupted. "You decided that what we had wasn't enough? That you'd rather throw it all away for her?" "It wasn't like that," she insisted. I love you, Mark. I do. But, but what? I snapped. You love her too? The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's expression crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her answer, or lack thereof, was all I needed. The next few days passed in a haze. Emma tried to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal, the lies, the stolen moments I hadn't been a part of. Lisa didn't come back, though I knew they were still in contact. I caught glimpses of Emma on her phone, her expression softening in a way that made my stomach churn. I considered leaving, packing a bag and walking away from it all. But this was my home too, and I wasn't going to let them push me out of it. If Emma wanted to fix things, she'd have to face the consequences of what she'd done. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dining table, the silence between us unbearable, Emma finally spoke. I don't know how to make this right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You can't, I said simply. What you've done, there's no going back from that. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I understand, she said, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. Then why? I asked. If you loved me, why did you do it? She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know, she admitted. Lisa and it started as friendship, and then it became something else. I didn't mean for it to happen, but once it did, I didn't know how to stop. Her words hung in the air, and I shook my head. You had a choice, Emma, I said. Every step of the way, you had a choice. And you chose to lie to me. She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the table. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what Emma had said. I didn't doubt that she loved me, at least, in her own way. But love wasn't enough to erase what she'd done. It wasn't enough to fix the broken trust, the shattered foundation of our marriage. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew one thing for certain. The life we'd built together would never be the same. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, and confusion twisted inside me, refusing to settle. The house felt suffocating, its walls filled with memories that now felt tainted. Emma tried to mend the distance between us, but her efforts felt half-hearted, weighed down by the enormity of what had happened. And then there was Lisa. She hadn't come back to the house since that day, but her presence lingered like a shadow. I knew Emma was still talking to her. I'd catch her glancing at her phone, her expression soft and wistful. It was a painful reminder that while I was trying to make sense of the pieces, they were still connected in a way I wasn't. One evening, after days of avoiding each other, Emma approached me as I sat in the living room. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red. For the first time in weeks, she sat down beside me, close enough that I could feel the weight of her presence. Mark, she began, her voice trembling. We need to talk. I said nothing, my gaze fixed on the wall ahead. She took a deep breath and continued. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't ever take back, and I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. No, I said quietly. It's not. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But I need to be honest with you about what's happening. About Lisa. Go on, I said, my tone flat. Emma hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully. Lisa and what we had, it wasn't just a mistake, she admitted. It was real. It is real. And I don't want to lie to you about that anymore. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to stay calm. So what are you saying? I asked. That you want to be with her? She shook her head quickly. No, I don't want to lose you, Mark. I love you, and I want to make this work. But I can't pretend that my feelings for Lisa don't exist. My chest tightened as the full weight of her words sank in. You can't have it both ways, Emma, I said firmly. You can't ask me to stay while keeping her in your life. I'm not asking for that, she said softly. But I think there's a way for us to figure this out. Together. Her meaning became clear as the silence stretched between us. My stomach churned as I realized what she was suggesting. You're serious, I said, my voice tinged with disbelief. You want me to what? Share you with her? I know it sounds insane, she said quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush. But it doesn't have to be like that. It's not about choosing one of you. It's about all of us being honest about what we want, about what we need. I stared at her, stunned into silence. The sheer audacity of her proposal was staggering, but what surprised me more was the tiny flicker of curiosity it sparked. I'd spent weeks grappling with feelings of betrayal, anger, and loss. But beneath it all was a part of me that still loved Emma, that wanted to hold on to what we had, even if it meant venturing into unfamiliar territory. Have you talked to Lisa about this? I asked finally. Emma hesitated, then nodded. She's open to it, she said, but only if you are. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. The idea felt impossible, like something out of a soap opera. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that the dynamic between the three of us had already shifted. Lisa wasn't just some outsider. She was someone who had been a part of our lives for years, someone I had trusted, even if that trust had been shattered. Mark, Emma said gently, breaking through my thoughts. I know this is a lot to ask, and if it's too much, I'll understand. But I needed to be honest with you about where I'm at. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened street. The weight of her words pressed down on me, forcing me to confront truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Over the next few days, I couldn't think about anything else. Emma didn't push me for an answer, but the tension between us was palpable. I tried to imagine what a future with this arrangement might look like. Tried to imagine if it was even possible to rebuild trust in such an unconventional way. Finally, I decided I needed to hear from Lisa herself. If this was going to work, if it could work, I needed to understand her intentions. I called her and asked her to meet me at a nearby cafe. She agreed, her tone cautious but calm. When she arrived, I could tell she was nervous. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, her gaze steady but wary. I didn't think I'd hear from you, she said. I didn't think I'd call, I replied honestly. But here we are. She nodded, her expression softening. Mark, I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I care about Emma, and I care about you too. I want to find a way for all of us to move forward. Her words surprised me, but they also gave me a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about deciding what I wanted, what we all wanted, and whether it was possible to move forward together. When I returned home, Emma was waiting for me. She looked up as I entered, her expression filled with hope and trepidation. Did you talk to her? She asked. I did, I said, sitting down across from her. And I'm willing to try. But this only works if we're honest with each other, completely honest. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. I promise, she said softly. No more lies. It wasn't the resolution I had expected, but it was a resolution nonetheless. And as we took the first tentative steps into this new reality, I realized that while our life would never be the same, it didn't mean it couldn't still hold meaning, connection, and even love.